So, welcome everyone
It's Barbara.
to October's first Sunday reading and conversation with Stefan Kiesbye and Don Mitchell. This series features two Saddle Road Press writers reading from their work and talking about their craft. The recordings are also available on Saddle Road's YouTube channel. Just search for Saddle Road Press. Sorry, the dog just hit the door. Stefan Kiesbye is the author of the novels Next Door Lived a Girl, The Staked Plains, and But I Don't Know You, all published by Saddle Road Press, and numerous other books published both in Germany and in the US. He teaches creative writing at Sonoma State University in Northern California. Don Mitchell is the author of the ethnographic short story collection, A Red Woman Was Crying, and the memoir, Shibai, Remembering Jane Britton's Murder. He is an anthropologist, a photographer, and a book designer, including designing for Saddle Road Press. Don and Stefan have been friends and writing buddies since meeting in a fiction writing class taught by Irving Feldman at the University of Buffalo in the 1990s. Today, Don will be reading from Shibai, and Stefan will be reading from But I Don't Know You. So I'm going to call first, I think, on Don to begin.
Okay. It's great to be here with Stefan, not just because we're old friends, but because there are all kinds of connective threads that run through our work, some in non-obvious ways. I'll give one example. As Ruth just said, I'm the Saddle Road Press designer, which means that I've designed and typeset every Saddle Road Press book, including Stefan's. I remember being amused by sections in But I Don't Know You, the ones that were set in Buffalo, in places that I knew very well. And I could see where he was exact about the settings and where he wasn't. Of course, that's fiction, but I caught myself thinking more than once, hey, it didn't really look like that.
It
Which,
did. It did.
Stefan appears indirectly in my work. For example, in the unpublished novel News of Elsewhere, which is set on Bougainville Island in the last century, there's a Catholic missionary priest named Father Kiesbye. The protagonist in that novel is named Elliot, and surprise, a man named Elliot appears in But I Don't Know You. At least Stefan didn't make me a Jehovah's Witness to get back at me. Oh, but wait, I'm not actually Elliot, am I? Stefan was at one of my weddings, not the most recent one, that being the one that lasted. I was one of Stefan's groomsmen at his wedding to Sana's, but I was also acting as the photographer. It was a fairly casual wedding. So from time to time, it was in my tux and everything, rented, of course. I reached behind me to get my camera off of the stage, stepped out of line, made a few shots, and went back to being a groomsman. It was pretty funny. And then I'll just have to say, in case Stefan forgets, although how could he forget? We've run 2 marathons together, for example. He beat me both times. Anyway,
Yeah.
so we do have this history of doing stuff inside and outside and giving each other grief and sharing our writing. And so after Stefan says whatever he has in mind for an intro, then I'll read from Shibai, but I don't want to go right on into that because we thought we should do a little back and forth first.
Yeah. We also had the really um Don is my first American friend. We met in the workshop and he offered to give me rides home, and that's how that started. And I ended up having a sort of pre-Christmas dinner at his house. It was my first sort of American Christmas experience 29 years ago. So And we've managed kind of to stay in touch, even though we've never or hardly ever lived in the same place. I mean, I lived in Buffalo for only a few years, and Don has, of course, moved away. So, but we managed to stay together, and one of these things was um, running marathon and training long distance for the same thing. And we had the really great idea because we were running the Buffalo Marathon to run a marathon before running the marathon together as a training run. And we were like, yeah, we're gonna at 20 miles, we're just gonna quit. And of course, then we didn't. And like we just did the whole thing. And for the real marathon, my legs were totally shot and I was just sort of stumbling and bumbling along and hurting badly. Um, Also, I want to first like thank Don and Ruth for organizing this reading, but more importantly, or equally importantly, um, designing and publishing three of my books, which is really, really, really super cool. So big thank you. Um, so I have to talk a little bit. So as you can hear from my accent, which I will never lose.
It's
And I train it every now and so often. Um, that I was born in Germany, and I came over to the United States when I was 30. So next year I will have sort of lived half my life in Germany and half my life in America. I just recently became an American citizen. Woo, I can vote now. And the thing is that my first 30 years were kind of lost when I came over. And partly that was kind of by design. I wanted to lose those, but it's hard to explain life in another country to people in another country. I mean, like it's the new country. Yeah, Germany doesn't look that different from America, sort of on the surface, but how the school system works, how people were raised, what expectations they had, all these things don't really translate. So I lost my first 30 years. And then in 2017, we were here in Northern California, and Sanas and I had been moving around a lot. And our belongings had shrunk and shrunk because we didn't want to acquire too much new stuff. And we had all sort of our memories sort of um, pared down to a few boxes of things that you just couldn't let go because that was all we wanted to take. And then in 2017, the Tubbs fire happened and our neighborhood burned down completely. And so that part of my life was suddenly also gone. So we really had nothing, like no memorabilia, no nothing. And um, and I realized that if Sanas should ever go grocery shopping and decide to never come back, I would have no witness to any of my life, like nothing. Um, and and that's where but I don't know you comes in because for me, like after the fire and then during the pandemic, this book is set in the first year of the pandemic. 2020 to early 2021. This book is an effort in some ways, even though more than 50% is pure fiction, an attempt at keeping in touch with people I've lost in my life and the things I had left, photos, pictures. Like a friend of mine had drawn me a picture that I had moved with like the whole time, and all these other little knickknacks to give them a place and to recreate in the book at times photos that I was really missing that I really loved and to describe them. And so it's not in the first person, it's a different character, and it's really not me. But at the same time, even the passages that are pure fiction somehow are trying to make up for all the little things that are gone and can't be replaced, and to remind me in weird ways of that. So to kind of through fiction evoke memories that might or might not be true memories. So sorry for the long intro. So I'll read my first thing is a very short briefing from the very beginning, just to give you an idea of what's happening. And then we'll switch to Don. Chapter 1. After 5 months, the line where he ended and she began had softened. Shorat reached into him to retrieve crude lust, large lumps of patience, and pinches of anger after the son had moved to the front of the house and allowed them to sit in their plastic Adirondack chairs on the back patio. In early spring, after an exceptionally dry Northern California winter, they had shoveled sand and gravel and carried paver stones to extend that patio past the concrete slab, poured by one subcontractor and irreparably dirt-stained by another. Shorat helped herself to what he felt were his last reserves of what might be called sanity, if sanity was the power to distinguish between what seemed real and what couldn't be. Isolated at home, quarantined from friends and the few relatives they were still talking to, sanity became ever more abstract. The border with madness, a line shakily drawn into the darkening sky. Cal helped himself to Shorat's stubbornness, soaked up the devotion she so easily spent without doubts or suspicion. 20 years prior, she'd made the decision to love him and stay at his side, and she never appeared to question her choice. When he felt his mind dissolving around the edges, she was there to firm its contours again. Their ups and downs complemented each other's. Rarely were they miserable together, happy together, only in the brief moments when the sinking sun set the yard and everything else aglow. The drinks in their hands diminished to the point that he started thinking about the second refill. They managed to sustain this fragile equilibrium after long years of observing and mimicking each other's patterns and growing together. One Thursday in August, he received word that his father had been diagnosed with stomach cancer. Cal hadn't visited the small northern German town in years, hadn't spoken to his parents since that last time, and refused to answer emails and letters. It was his sister who kept him in the loop when things took a turn for the worse. She wrote in German, still called him by the name their parents had given him, feigning familiarity. Their father, she wrote, would start treatment soon. Cal was alone in the house and free to stare at the few sentences on the screen, lightheaded and intensely focused, as though he had just swallowed a new illicit drug and were afraid and ashamed of the effect it might have on him. Shorat had left minutes earlier to buy spices, vegetables, yogurt, garlic, and ruffles. Only once every 2 weeks did they stock up on the essentials, trips in masks and with hand sanitizer to Costco, the only store whose aisles were wide enough to stay out of people's way, unless they sought to buy meats and cheeses. The refrigerated section was crowded even after 7 in the evening. There had been reports about meat shortages. People were hoarding. Costco, however, didn't carry the finer things, the Persian foods Shorat craved. And so she left the house once or twice a week to afford Cal some unobserved time, to be among people and to do something that had been routine just a few months ago, and to satisfy her own desire for dishes from her childhood. A weight he didn't quite know he carried had lifted after Shorat pulled out of the garage and the engine sound evaporated. The dogs, Yuki and Vanya, were dozing in his office. It was too hot to stir, too early for their late afternoon meal. The email from his sister didn't give any details about his father's situation. It was pitifully brief, failed to address how his mother was coping and what the next steps might be. Cal would have loved to tell Shorat the news right away because without telling her, events refused to become real. Only by telling his wife about the small and even smaller occurrences of his day were they relegated to memory. Whatever he forgot to tell her would be lost.
Anyway, I'm going to read from my memoir, Shibai, Remembering Jane Britton's Murder, which Saddle Press published in 2020. I think some parts of it will be a little bit unclear without some introduction. When I was an anthropology graduate student at Harvard in the 60s, my first wife, Jill, and I were friends with Jane Britton, an archaeology student a few years behind us. Jane lived in an apartment on the same floor we did. In January 1969, she was murdered. Jill and I and other students were grilled by the police, and no one was ever charged. In 2017, two things happened. The case was reopened, and an investigative reporter named Becky Cooper contacted me. Becky was writing a book about the case. She came to Hilo to talk about Jane, and we became close friends. Her book, We Keep the Dead Close, was a bestseller. In 2020, I decided to write not just about Jane and what happened in 1969, but about how the case had affected my life for almost half a century. In Hawaii, Shibai is used the way people up on the mainland use bullshit or cover-up or smokescreen or gaslighting. It's an appropriate title for some of what happened, including what at one point I call self-Shibai. Shibai is written in second person, which is strange, and it wanders around in time and place, exploring not just Cambridge and Harvard, the Big Island of Hawaii, and also Bougainville Island in the Western Pacific, and the Nagovisi people I worked with there as an anthropologist. It includes real people and fictional people. When I was writing Shibai, I realized that I hadn't just been trying to find Jane in those memories, those pictures, those written notes and letters. I've been trying to locate myself, the young me, the middle-aged me, the old me, because all those ontological stages were me. Now, that's an obvious thing to say, but as I've aged, I've seen it more clearly. What parts of the 82-year-old me can I find in the 20-something me, and the other way around? As I wrote in Malka, the novel I'm trying to place, words I put in Jun Nakashima's mouth, the trick in memoir writing is knowing when to map the old you onto the young you. That can be very difficult. Stefan suggested we write about people lost and found and what they showed us and how to make sense of how we captured them in pictures and images, in text. I thought I'd begin with something from 1969, The Investigation, that's also about photography. I've done a little bit of light editing and rearranging. That's in case anyone has memorized the whole book. Okay. There was a bloody fingerprint on Jane's kitchen window pane. A Cambridge detective, somehow knowing you did photography, remember this is in second person, asked you if you'd photograph and print it so they could run it. You took your tripod, focusing rail, your Nikon F with macro lens over to Jane's, shot the print, and the detective went with you to your dark room, which was in another part of Cambridge, in a professor's basement. You developed the film, made some prints. On the wall next to the enlarger were two prints from a high contrast, high grain session you'd done with Jane. The prints were flawed, but you liked them, so they went up on the wall. The detective was interested in them, not surprisingly. At about that point, you started wondering whether the whole photography business was an elaborate ruse to get into your darkroom. For what? Perhaps to find evidence that you and Jane were romantically linked? You remember giving the detective the Jane print, along with the still damp ones, fresh from the fixing tray of the fingerprint. Now, an aside here, I'm not a hoarder, although Becky calls me a sentimental archivist. I do keep physical objects if they have work left in them. So the tripod I just mentioned is sitting here in a field in Freeville holding my rain gauge 55 years later. Now back to the text. The Massachusetts State Police asked you to come downtown and talk to them. You and 3 or 4 of them were all seated at a table, as if in a meeting. One of the detectives casually picked up a manila envelope, opened it, and slid over to you an 8 by 10 glossy of Jane's flayed skull, left occipital crushed, saying, "Did you do this?" You'd seen your share of skulls in the department, but you'd never seen the skull of someone you loved, skinned of its thick, dark hair, with what seemed to be small bits of flesh still attached, flaps of skin on the stainless steel autopsy table. My God, they cut her head off, you thought. It was so shocking you couldn't speak for a moment. You shook your head. No, you finally said, I didn't do that. But you knew they were thinking, maybe you did. Even now, you don't forgive them the flayed skull. So that's the not so happy photographic part. And now let's go back to Stefan.
Yeah, and it's it's strange to me. So like I find it hard. Like some people like say, oh, after something horrible has happened, whatever that horrible thing is, and you can't go back to seeing your friend for whatever reason, like to remember the good times or the happy times. And I've always been in awe of people who can do that and blank out what sort of the last memory of the person might be, like either a horrible argument and here like this photo. Um, and to how do you ever get sort of the photo out of your head? So the photo almost takes over the real person or stands in front of the real person. So in the next passage I read, it's a description of a photograph. So Cal at some point decides because he has lost all these things that connect him to his wife, and his wife has now disappeared, and he doesn't know where she is, and hopes that his way, he's traveling across country back to Buffalo from Northern California. He has left his job, that somehow they will end up in the same place, but they don't, he doesn't know. And so he's recreating the photographs that he's lost by just describing the photographs. And this is one of them. Shorat after the haircut. In 2001, we lived in a house on Liberty Street in Ann Arbor, Michigan, not far from downtown. It was a short walk to the restaurant Immovable Feast, and in another 3 or 4 minutes, we'd be at the Fleetwood Diner, open 24 hours every day. A one-bedroom apartment on the second floor had been the first we shared, after Shorat had finished her degree in Buffalo and joined me in Ann Arbor. The space had been cramped, but after a year, one of the downstairs apartments became available, and we never grew to love it, but we did have a larger living area, an extra bedroom, and the light during the day was nearly green because of the trees outside the large front window. I'd been trimming Shorat's hair for some time, and on this occasion she wanted it much shorter. She sat down on the purple wooden chair, a chair I had found and painted before her move to Michigan, and she wore nothing but her panties. Her blonde hair, of various and varying shades, from stark white to the color of the dust you gather when swiping a finger along the window ledge of a beach house, she had dyed a light rust brown, and she wanted it short on the sides and slightly longer on top, 80s style. The light in the room was green, brighter behind her because we kept the curtains of the front window half closed. But the window to the side of the house had no curtains, and in the afternoon the sun brightened the area for which we would buy a yellow sofa later on in the year, after receiving a check from the government to restart the economy after September 11. But on the day I took this picture of Shorat, the sofa her parents had given us, and which her dad had built himself, was still in the apartment and giving both of us backaches. Pretty it was, with its striped cushions, but we needed several pillows each to make it pain-free through a movie. Shorat sat on the purple chair, but maybe it was one of the metal chairs we had already bought, the surplus chairs from the university, which you also found in army offices. They came with green or gray vinyl upholstery, and despite their Spartan looks, were oddly comfortable. I prefer to think she sat on one of the metal chairs, a green one, because the light was green and behind her the light was much brighter. No, not much, just enough to render it three-dimensional, to distinguish Shorat's drawings we'd hung on the wall, drawings from her years in art school before she decided to enroll in computer science and start all over again. Shorat is sitting on the green chair, enough light coming through the trees and the half-open curtains to illuminate her face. She's squinting slightly from behind her glasses, and because her glasses have thick lenses, her eyes appear small. She's squinting into the light, and a trace of a suspicious smile appears on her lips. When you look closely, it seems to disappear, but when you shut your eyes for a second and open them again, there it is. She's suspicious because it's the first time I haven't just trimmed her hair, taken maybe an inch off its length, but really cut it, styled it with scissors and shears, and she hasn't seen the outcome yet. The hair I've taken off has accumulated on her shoulders and large breasts, and before she can get up and swipe at the hair, fine rust-brown hair clinging to her skin, I take my camera, an old Konica SLR I once bought in Denver for $40, and take her picture. Her face is wide, her jaw strong, and her hair is bracingly short. Her skin, so incredibly soft, is tinged olive even though she's as pale as the moon. Her chin shows some red spots, pimples she hasn't grown out of yet. That will happen once she turns 30. For now she still has acne, which embarrasses her and which I secretly adore. I don't know why. Her suspicious smile doesn't keep her from looking almost aggressively into the camera, but her shoulders and breasts make her vulnerable, and the hair on them makes them look even softer than they truly are. Shorat is vulnerable, ready to say something harsh, but she lets me take the picture, one she will never like much, and beyond her, way beyond her, hangs a mirror, and you can see the back of her head and the half-open window in that mirror. She'll never like that picture, but I will keep it. We'll keep it every time we move, every single time. It will always travel with me until it burns in the Tubbs fire in 2017. She'll never understand why I like the picture, nor will she like my hands on her breasts. She doesn't even like her breasts because they remind her of her mother's cancer. She finds them too large, too cumbersome. She doesn't like my attention, my touch. She'll barely tolerate a kiss, won't tolerate her nipples between my lips, my teeth. Her smile is an act of defiance, but she doesn't stop me from taking the picture. Later, I regret taking it, as though I've stolen something from her. But when the prints arrive, it's the one picture she fails to hide, where she is open, where you can see how little she trusts me, how little she expects from my efforts as a hairdresser and photographer. Her smile says, I don't know you. I still don't. It says, we've been married for nearly 2 years, and I'm still not sure I actually like you. And,
Right.
and with that, back to Don.
All right, well, here's more, well, not surprisingly, about photography and pictures. You never, not even when you were a beginning photographer, bought into the vulgar, I am a camera trope. Nobody's a camera, even when their eye is glued to the eyepiece and their hands focus and adjust exposure without conscious thought. The way you frame that picture has something to do with who you are. So does the way you exposed it and processed it. And this was as true back in the days of developing and printing film in a darkroom as it is in these days of Adobe Lightroom. This is not the same as asserting that everything is subjective. It's merely an acceptance that human beings see, remember, forget, narrate, are mistaken, and even lie according to who they are and what they've learned, in what culture they were raised and learned how to be. To an anthropologist, nothing could be more obvious. Before Becky arrived, you found a set of negatives from a portrait session you and Jane did. You hadn't looked at them in years, probably because you only remembered a later session in which you shot in what was then a popular style, high contrast, lots of grain. The negatives you found were earlier and pretty much straight, no messing around with exposure, with development. When you put the negatives on the light table, tears came to your eyes. Look at her, you thought, suddenly remembering that afternoon in a hot room. She'd ask you to photograph her. Floodlights, your Nikon F with a fast lens, gray card, light meter. Jane in a chair, awkward at first, not wanting to pose, saying she didn't know how. You were just getting started as a serious photographer and hadn't done a portrait session before, only candids. You told her to play to the camera, play to you, play to the room with sloping walls and crude bookshelves. Be yourself, you said. You hardly knew what you meant by that cliched command. But in a moment, she came alive. An energy seemed to flow from her to you through the camera via her image fleetingly on the ground glass. It didn't matter if she was playing to the camera or to you. Once you learned how she moved her head, her body, you could anticipate even slight movements. You felt as though the two of you were dancing. Afterwards, you didn't say anything about how you'd felt, and neither did she. You didn't know how to. You hadn't sent Becky any of your Jane pictures. When she was in California on her way to Hilo, you made quick scans and emailed them to her, but you weren't ready to write about what you felt in that room. Here she is, you wrote, beautiful. My heart hurts. These are having a much stronger effect on me than I would have ever predicted. She seems vulnerable. Becky replied, I'm speechless, taxiing on the runway in LAX, and I can't stop staring. And if I find them so arresting, I can only imagine how they're gripping you. In one image, she's turned slightly to face the camera. One hand's on her hip, the other on a thigh. There's a tautness, as if she's poised to get up, come to the camera, perhaps to you. Everything about her says, this is who I am. 2 years later, Becky chooses that image for her book's cover, although her publisher crops it down to a headshot. When working with the traditional 6-frame strips of negatives, as opposed to scrolling through JPEGs on a computer screen, there are always frames you never look at closely unless you're running them through an enlarger, and it's been more than 40 years since you had a darkroom. In fall 2020, you take the strips from their glassine homes, drop them on the light table again, and find a shot that's so wonderful, so very Jane, that you immediately know it's your cover image. If Becky's image says, "This is who I am," the one you found says, "This is how it was." Cigarette in hand, looking a bit tired, dreamy, no longer high on what's happening, she sits on the same chair against the chimney. Except in this one, you see the floodlight, the cluttered side table, and instead of the blank chimney wallpaper of the other shots, there's a print of a Japanese god, which now hangs in your son's Brooklyn townhouse. Ruth, on seeing the image, says, "It's sexy and badass." Just as an anthropologist believes that an outsider sees some parts of a culture more clearly than an insider does by virtue of not having been immersed in it all his life, you believe that very often a person who has no attachment to, no knowledge or memory of an image will see things that the photographer doesn't. He'll be looking for shapes, for patterns in that image made of a person he doesn't know. You send your son Ethan, whose visual sense is honed by his professional work as a film and video editor, a cover version with the entire frame inset. Almost immediately, he cropped it, manipulated it a bit, and returned to you a perfect cover design. You hated giving up the floodlights, the books, Jane's pack of Winston cigarettes, the prints on the wall. But Ethan's crop made up for losing what? Context, you supposed. But you willingly gave that up because the image was so strong. Years ago, you published a story called Burials, which was on the surface about burials, both archaeological and non-archaeological. One theme was the perception of time. In one section, the narrator and his pit partner, Suzanne, excavate an infant burial. You went back to that story when you were thinking about those negative strips in their envelope for so many years, waiting for you and Becky to explore them, for you to situate yourself in that room and immerse yourself on what happened there. And this is the narrator in the story. I suppose there are people whose lives can be represented by a single stratigraphic column, but I'm not one of them. Mine seems to move between sites, sometimes occupying several simultaneously. There appear to be unconformities. I haven't found an appropriate dating method for myself yet. Thinking of process is hard. The answer is more elusive and obscure. On a shell midden late in a day in May 1963, I began to understand how past and present can multiply intersect, and how these intersections can either trap us or spit us out. There's a picture of Suzanne, and then there's the burial. The recorded sequence on that day was that I shot Suzanne first, and we uncovered our burial second. The evidence for this is that the two events are recorded next to each other on the orange strip of negatives, and they will stay in that relative position forever, even though the prints made from them have been well plowed. The only physical evidence of that day left to me are those negatives. The rest is all memory, and it isn't fixed in time, but instead exists in that world where the past remains not just alive, but loose, and where the only thing that stays fixed is how we feel when we remember it. And that changes too, but more slowly. And that's the end of that section.
Cool. Um, to keep the photography going here, um, Cal arrives in Buffalo, and because he needs something to do, because his funds will last him some time, but not forever, he looks on Craigslist. I don't know if anybody does that anymore, but whatever, like Craigslist, um, and finds a call for models from a photographer. And he doesn't know exactly what it entails, but it needs to be someone slightly older. And so he answers that, and the photographer arranges for them to meet. The photo Oh yeah, and I should say that this will lead into sort of the last part of the book that is mostly about this photography project. The photographer turned out to be in his early 30s, tall and slightly overweight, handsome in a 70s kind of way. His sweater fit snugly, his pants were corduroy, and hair and sideburns were long and dark. I know this is awkward, or, well, I think it might be. It might be a weird project, but I want you to know that I'm not, well, it's difficult. The photographer, whose name was Weston, had lost his father the previous year. His parents had divorced when he was 10, and he had grown up exclusively with his mom, visiting his dad only a few times during his college years. I have these memories of mom and dad together, of them sitting on the sofa, she in his lap, both of them laughing. I remember them getting drunk together and laughing. I hated my mom's shrill voice. When she drank, she turned into a person I didn't recognize. Worse, she turned into a person who didn't recognize me, her only son. My dad was a sloppy drunk. He couldn't find the bathroom door and instead opened closets. He just laughed quietly, like God had told him a secret joke. Or maybe the devil. In any case, when my father died of esophageal cancer, he left his home and his papers and everything to me. By then, he lived near Lake George. I was in grad school, I had papers to write, artwork to turn in, and the day before I was going to drive north and have a look at my dad's house, it burned down. The police suspects it was arson, but they never caught the guy who did it. The apartment, a lower unit on Hurdle Avenue, was cozy, despite the traffic noise overpowering the old single-pane windows. Cal had taken a seat on the black leather sofa, the only light in the living room coming from a red-shaded floor lamp. Area rugs covered the shabby hardwood floors. Bookshelves lined the walls, and books lay stacked on the coffee table. You want me to be your dad. You don't need to look like him. That's not of the essence. But I need to see him in you, a certain way of being. So you're looking for a person, for the person someone might mistake for your father. And you want me to be that someone else if all goes well. You don't look like him at all if that's important to you. Cal shrugged. What do you have in mind? I remember certain moments. No, not correct. I remember certain photographs of him. My mom threw out everything that reminded her of my dad. She has this firm belief that whenever a relationship ends, you either return the items that were given to you by your lover, or, if that's not an option, you donate them or put them in the trash. All the photographs of Dad, she chucked them. But whenever I visited him, he'd show me old pictures. I don't think he ever got over Mom. It wasn't him who broke it off. I mean, well, he did cheat on her, but he didn't want to leave her. I think they never matched up well. They loved each other, of that I am certain, but they never got to know each other well. They didn't get each other. You don't remember the specific occasions, but you remember the photographs your dad showed you. I made a list. It's not a very long list, 23 pictures. I want to retake them. I want them to be in my possession. I want to look at them and see Dad. I want to see my parents. What about your mom? She hates the project. She doesn't want anything to do with it. You found a stand-in? Yes. You're going to make memories. I always found that phrase infuriating, as though we get to consciously decide which events, which people we'll remember. But your project is exactly that. West nodded, and for a while they didn't say anything, and the silence was comfortable. Cal rather liked the apartment, and the whiskey was good. Are you ready? Weston finally asked. Sure, Cal said. What do you need me to do?
Yeah, that's good. I remember I liked that very much when I was reading it. Okay, so I've got two more that are fairly short, and one is meant to be funny, and the other is not. April 2018.
But which one is which?
Yeah, well, we'll leave that to the listener. April 2018, you're diagnosed with prostate cancer, which requires trips to Honolulu for a CAT scan, MRI, biopsy, and an expensive shot to drive your testosterone to zero, something you'd rather not have happen, except you'd rather not die either. In Honolulu, the screen in the biopsy room is showing 3 pelvic scans. When you're alone, you get off the table and inspect them. One scan is obvious: ilium, ischium, os pubis, lumbar vertebra, femoral heads, the standard landscape. The other 2 are disorienting because the views from inside your abdomen, looking down, strange and wonderful. A pair of wrinkled objects. Wait, are those my balls? Holy shit, they are. You take out your phone and make a picture of the screen, which you send to Ruth and to your son. You think of sending it to Becky, but then you think, a CAT scan of my balls is mighty like a dick pic, so you don't. But the thought makes you laugh, which is a good thing when you're about to have an ultrasound wand shoved up your butt and 12 needles shot into your prostate without anesthetic. And then I'll close with this, which is in Hill when Becky was with me. One afternoon in your living room, the 2 of you sometimes on the couch next to the coffee table littered with notes, letters, a pair of MacBooks, sometimes in the dining room with its stacks of slide boxes, negative folders, movie film, the light table, the loops, then returning to talk about what you'd looked at. It seemed to you that Becky was as comfortable in those surroundings as you were, and that there was nothing you were doing that either you or she would do differently. When you asked yourself why, the answer came quickly. It was because Becky, so alive, filled with curiosity and ability, was doing what you had longed to do at her age, which was to tell untold stories, to write what hadn't been written, to bring the past to life, to make art, which made her the young you. Except when you were young, you closed the door on all that, and she hadn't. You could see that Becky was trying to live Jane's life, which meant that Jane might return to life in her. At your age, you would never live Becky's life, but her success might open the world again for you. And this time you would not close the door. Entry would be a gift from Jane. That's that. Well, my friend, we read a lot of different stuff.
Yes, yes.
I think,
But it all fit together in a weird way.
yeah, I know. Let's do a Substack with these, and
Yeah,
Everybody has a
seriously,
podcast or a
anyway.
Substack.
it really, the whole memories in photographs theme has been really interesting.
And I think we're open, like if anybody would like to comment or ask a nefarious question, this is the
Yeah,
time for that.
yeah, absolutely. We have time for it.
Oh yeah, we do because nobody cares whether we end on the hour or not. Of
Yeah.
course, we could end early if everybody's bored and wants to go watch a football game or something like that. But it would be nice if
Do you
people
have
say things.
you can, if you wish, unmute yourselves and, or anybody who has a question, um, or comment or,
Because otherwise we'll talk you into submission.
everyone's exhausted.
Well, it is Sunday afternoon, I guess.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it, both readings. Thank you for reading.
Thank you, Jane.
What are the titles again of both books?
Actually, here, this is Stefan's book. Whoops. Oh gosh, this isn't gonna work.
It's But I Don't Know You.
But I
But I
don't
don't know
know
you.
you. But I don't know you. And Don's book is Shibai.
Right. Okay, thanks. Oh, it is a striking cover.
Yeah, I wish I'm sorry, I have the fake background, it gets in the way of showing something, but yeah.
Yeah.
Barbara,
I would just like to say hi. It's nice to see
Hi.
everyone
Yeah.
in
And you're gonna
person.
read next time.
Hi, yeah, I just want to say thank you to Don and Stefan for your readings. Quite powerful work, and I really enjoyed the notion of the photograph as a framing device or a structural device, and how your different approaches. I thought that was really cool, and I imagine that you discussed photography when you were preparing for this talk.
Yes, I'm sure. Yeah.
It's really beautiful to hear the crossover in both of your work. And I also love the way you both gave us like the type of camera and the lighting. And also, I love that idea of a fictional character passing through the memories to create memories in the book. And what a beautiful idea that the memories are captured again in the book. And then Don, that the um, just the different ways the person is coming to life and how moving to find a younger self in this other woman who's writing a book at the same time, both of you going back through that material. Did she also come to you with insights about what that found for her? I just wondered if, since you've both written these books and some time has passed and you're still speaking with each other.
Well, not at the time. At the time, we were very careful not to talk about what we were doing to each other. I think, I think I say this in Shibai. I mean, she had a big New York publisher and everything, so the procedure and the time frame was a bit different. Excuse me. So she had advanced review copies before I was even finished writing. And she came up to hang out. And so Ruth and her friend, now husband, Cohen, just talked about one thing or another, but then she left the review copy and it was in the living room. And I thought, I cannot look at this. So Ruth took it. And I said, well, you can read it, of course. And then she read it and she said, yeah. But she didn't say anything about it.
Yeah. I said it was wonderful.
And so I would sometimes, I would be in my room, which is the same room I'm in now, and the advanced copy was, it's like 20 feet away. And I would say, I got to get done. I got to get done. I got to get done, because if I don't get done, I can't read the review copy. And so I finished, and I reviewed it. I mean, I read the review copy in, 2 sessions, just, delighted with what she had done, because it was a much larger project, no comparison. I mean, it was, huge numbers of people, and it's terrific, just a terrific book. But and so I loved it. But what made me laugh at the time, and it still makes me laugh, is I was standing in the living room and I said, Ruth, I just finished it. This is really good. And I picked up my phone and I was going to text her. And I said, what's the matter with you? You're going to text her and say that you liked you? I want you to call her, for God's sake. Well, so I called her up and we had a nice conversation. So, yeah, but
Actually, there is actually on I think it's on your website, Don. There's a video of a online conversation of you and Becky, and it's a good conversation. It really is. So if anybody's interested.
But yeah, anyway, I totally recommend that book if anybody thinks that if anybody is struck by the idea of a graduate student murder that was a cold case for 50 years and so on. Shibai and We Keep the Dead Close is a pretty nice pair.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Okay.
Can I say something just real quick? I just wanted to say that I love both of your bodies of work. And Stefan, I haven't read this one yet, but I've read others of your books. And it's kind of interesting because books for me sometimes are kind of like a photograph. And so they get associated with what else was happening around the time when you read them. And so I read Dawn's book and Becky's book together. I read them. I waited until I had both, and I read Dawn's and then I read Becky's right on top of it. And then I read 2 books by Maggie Nelson that are about her aunt being murdered. And so it was another author that was doing somewhat similar. And so there's a very strong in my mind. And I just wanted to tell you, Stefan, that now your stories feel woven into that memory that I have of Becky and Dawn, because you spoke to each other so beautifully about the way that you were approaching memory. So thank you for that. And also your book, The Staked Plains, right, in New Mexico, I
Yeah.
read before I moved here, and it has forever colored my perception of where I live now, because
I'm sorry. I'm
oh
sorry.
no, I love it. I'm always thinking, don't let the dog out. They can run for 2 days and you'll still be able to see them,
Yeah.
but they'll be 2 days away on the high desert plains where I live. Thank
Yeah.
you.
but
Thank
Mikhail,
you, Michelle.
just so we're talking about all these interconnections, that the Staked Plains makes use of something that is from A Red Woman Was Crying, where one of the guys in A Red Woman Was Crying is talking about something that he did to a vicious dog in Rabaul, which is in Papua New Guinea, which I don't have to say what it was, but to kill it. And it's just in there, this is what he did and this is what happened. And so you can imagine my surprise when I'm looking at the manuscript of The Staked Plains and the same thing is done. And I thought, all right.
Yeah,
Stefan got some use out of that.
I love making those kind of connections, and especially when you personally know people that, both of you came to Cloverdale and read at my Books on Stage events. And
Exactly.
so it puts even another layer onto it. So thank you both very much. Very glad I could be here today.
Thank you.
I think it was Irving Feldman, and I will totally probably mangle whatever he said that night in the workshop. But he said something to the account that, you're a writer when you betray your friends and family.
Yeah.
And And so I was always, if I hear a good story, I'll use it. And so the story of how to kill a vicious dog always stuck with me. It was very visceral, and so I finally found a good place for it.
Well, thank you both for reading and talking.
And
This is,
thanks everyone for coming.
Yes,
yeah,
I
thank
say
you.
the
Yeah,
same
thank
thing.
you.
Thank
It was
you.
wonderful.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
Thanks,
On the
Ruth.
first Tuesday of next month, and Jim McVeigh, and I'm blanking on. I'm sorry, I'm blanking
Catherine
on.
Winograd,
Yeah, yes, Catherine Winograd will be reading.
the Colorado contingent.
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you. Bye.
Thank you.